Good morning. This is Jason Dean. It is Wednesday at about 10 o'clock. And yeah, this is another Film Fanatic video. The, uh, the weather has been super crappy lately. We've been getting lots of rain and it's been cold and chilly, but hey, maybe the gods of nature will eventually bestow the real weather at some point. But hope everyone's doing good. I've been doing these shows. It's been a lot of fun. I just did a big review on Black Christmas, which is a movie I totally kicked myself for never seeing before. I've said before that I'm a huge. Well, my favorite style of films are always like in the exploitation world. My favorite genre being the slasher genre, in that within the confines of the exploitation world. Bill Lustwig's Maniac is my favorite slasher film of all time. But I have to say, after watching Black Christmas, I'm like, wow, why have I not ever seen this movie? I never heard about this movie until really a few years ago. And the last 2 or 3 years, I've been hearing so much about that film. And it was funny because when I first heard about it about 3 years ago, it came out in 1974, which is just mind blowing into itself. But when I first heard about it three years ago, it was a movie that came out, I believe, in 2014 or 15. A fairly recent movie, and it was called Black Christmas. And I thought, oh, okay, this is like a newer, somewhat older by today's standards, but more of a modern horror film. And then heard about it, and people, a lot of folks were saying it was really good, but for the most part, a lot of people were not liking the film. It was getting a lot of negative kind of reviews, and people were not talking so too highly about it. They said it had some really great things about it, but it wasn't until about a year of after that I realized, oh wait, it's actually that movie Black Christmas, which I think came out in 2013 or 2017, was a remake of a much older film from '74, which was the Canadian movie Black Christmas. And then I started to check out some things about that, and across the boards, people were saying that this is kind of the definitive slasher movie, the movie that started the genre, basically, the movie that everything after '74 was modeled after, and it basically was the blueprint of slasher films. And I was just like, why have I not seen this? I never heard about it when I was I don't remember hearing about it at all when I was a kid. Like a case in point, like when I talked about Maniac being my favorite, that was a movie I saw when I was a kid, back in the days of VHS. And about 2 years ago, I bought it on Blu-ray, and it definitely, hands down, remains my favorite slasher film of all time. But that came out in 1980, so I was chomping at the bit to see this, to see Black Christmas. And I had heard all of this tremendous hype around it, all of these accolades, and that it was just one of the greatest horror films ever made. And the emphasis always being on that it was, if you're like, particularly around the slasher genre, but overall horror in general, probably, if not the most important movie for that style. So I had looked for it in my travels and never came across it. And then last week, and this went on for a couple of years, and then I went. I generally don't order things online. I did. It's funny now that I say that, but I did order Maniac. That was a movie I like. Again, I had seen quite a few times as a kid. Always loved that movie, and saw and heard that there was this new Blu-ray 4K version of that film. And I'd only seen it when I was a kid, basically on VHS. So I did order. I remember I ordered it online and I got it, and it's just amazing. But I generally don't order things online. I love to go to the shops, Bull Moose, and just find it that way. My favorite YouTube guy, Moods 616, who is also a Canadian. Since we're talking about all things Canadian, he is a YouTube guy who is based in I think it's Ontario, Canada, and he's my favorite YouTube guy easily on the web, and he covers all kinds of movies, but his specialty thing is the exploitation world, and I have really learned a lot from watching his show. It's reintroduced me to films that I saw when I was a kid, and then also a whole ton of other directors that I never, really had seen before. One of the biggest things for me of discovery through his channel was the work of Jess Franco. I had seen a few of his movies when I was a kid, Facelift and a few of his other films, but I never knew who Jess Franco was as a director. And he was one of the most iconic exploitation directors. He was based in Spain and one of the most prolific directors ever. He might even be the most prolific director. I mean, almost over 100 films, just insane, crossing genres all over the place. But definitely an exploitation director. And I had seen his movies when I was a kid, a few of them, particularly like the more horror-based films, like one movie in particular, Facelift, which is just amazing. But through his show, through watching Mood 616, he talked a lot about Jess Franco, and I have bought a whole bunch of movies of his film, a whole bunch of Jess Franco movies. I've rediscovered him as a director, and it's been amazing. So I've had a lot of cool experiences around that. And Black Christmas is one of them too. That was kind of the same scenario. So the other day, last week, over the weekend on Sunday, I was at Bull Moose. And usually when I go into Bull Moose, like I said, when I go to Bull Moose in Waterville, I typically I buy music there and then I buy movies there. But my focus is to usually buy movies, and especially the exploitation world. And I usually go in and check out the music selection first. I found some good albums, did that, and then the majority of my time is digging deep into the horror selection that they have on Blu-rays, because they have just an amazing selection. And I went over there after I was done picking out music. I went over to the horror section, and the first movie I saw was Black Christmas, and I was just like, yes, snagged it right up, and and I have to say, all the hype and all the things that I've heard about that film, it's so just like, and then some. So just amazing, just amazing. So, and I have, and now, and I have to say, it's the first time I've ever seen that movie. Totally kicked myself for never seeing it again, but it's now one of my all-time favorites, instantly. And I have some plans to do a show around it, to a possible interview show to do around that will have something to do with Black Christmas. So stay tuned for that. We'll see how things work. And if I do solidify and line up something, which I'm hoping it will, I will make a big announcement, and it will be pretty awesome. So stay tuned for that. But today's show, I tried doing a video yesterday on this movie, and it didn't come out very well. I was kind of running low on time and energy, so I had to scrap it. So today is take two. And this film today is I think one of the greatest Japanese sci-fi B-movie exploitation movies that's ever been, and that is Battle in Outer Space. I have this really, really awesome TOHO collection. TOHO is probably the most well-known and definitely the most iconic Japanese studio. They started making movies as early as the early 50s, maybe even the late 40s. They're responsible for Godzilla and all of the wonderful B horror exploitation movies, particularly around the sci-fi genre. just iconic. They they put out Toho is definitely one of the most important studios ever to exist. They were really famous for, considering a lot of these films came out in the 50s and 60s. They still exist actually, but they were one of the first studios, movie studios that used miniatures. Miniatures were where they would build these monsters. Everything was handcrafted, and everything you see is in camera. Way before any kind of computer generated thing, and light years ahead of or before, blue screen. And as far as I know, even more recent productions from Toho Studios, they pretty much stick to the same template. They build a lot of their own kinds of things. Like a lot of those things, they still it's all handcrafted. They about I think it was probably 6 or 7 years ago. There was a new Godzilla movie that they put out called Shin Godzilla, which is one of my all-time favorite Godzilla movies. It's a newer one, and that movie still has that same kind of classic Toho aesthetic, even though there is a little bit of computer generated effects thrown in there, but it's still very much kind of handcrafted, and there's like all this care to detail, even though you know in this modern age they could do things technically easier, but it still has that beauty to it. But Toho, the most important and probably the most iconic monster that they introduced were the Godzilla movies. Mothra, and all of the amazing TV shows that they put out, Astro Man. The list is endless. All kinds of movies. All of the Godzilla movies, where they even incorporate King Kong, and just iconic. One of the greatest studios ever. One of the most important studios. I think one of the most important studios where George Lucas was tremendously influenced by Toho with how he created the first original or the first Star Wars movies, in particular A New Hope, where miniatures are used exclusively, and that was taken directly from Toho Studios. But Battle in Outer Space is one of my favorites, and that was directed by Ishiro Honda. And the story for this movie is, it's basically as straightforward as you can be, but it's so entertaining. When scientists suspect that an alien force is attacking Earth, they send two separate spaceships to weaken the enemy. And, again, this is kind of a crazy, bonker sci-fi ride. It's all miniatures, and considering that this film came out in '59 is pretty staggering. All of the in-camera effects are just amazing, and you know, it has a real cheesy aspect to it, but it's so fun, and it's really magical. And the level of imagination that you see on the screen is pretty staggering. I have this collection. I bought this collection, and it's called the Toho collection, and it's a DVD. It's got 2 discs on it. I bought this actually a few years back, maybe like 2 3 years ago. I bought this at Goodwill, and I've said before, like usually when I go to Goodwill, I go to the one in Rockland most of the time, and that's usually where I buy my more big budget Hollywood movies, the Blu-rays. They have a tremendous selection of those films, mostly used, but I've lucked out, and I've really beefed up those films, my collection as far as the Marvel movies, and other films. And I pretty much try to only stick to Blu-ray, but occasionally I find things that are on DVD that are good editions, collector's editions, or things like this. And I picked this up, and it's actually a really great edition. I would definitely down the road love to buy Battle in Outer Space separate by itself on Blu-ray. But this comes with a whole, 2 other movies. Comes with Mothra, the classic iconic movie, and The H-Man, which is which is a really awesome sci-fi movie. And there's no special features on here. There is some commentary, but I got this for $8, and it's a pretty amazing collection. But what I decided to do with this show is I'm gonna, I thought about just reviewing this entire thing and talking about all three movies, but I decided to make this a separate show and only talk about each movie one at a time because I feel like they're they're that good and they're that important to the expectation world, the sci-fi genre. And again, I'm always reminded that this movie, always blown away that this came out in '59, considering, you know, when I think about where we are at from a technological standpoint. And this, like I said, this movie was directed by Ishiro Honda, and he was the director who, he was the first director to direct the Godzilla films. So, I mean, changed the landscape forever for films, and especially sci-fi horror movies. I mean, talk about an important achievement. But this movie is just great. This is like definitely one of the best sci-fi movies. It's one of my all-time favorites. It's super campy. It's totally ridiculous. It's super entertaining. The effects are amazing. It's just so great. And I've always talked about my love of in-camera effects. To me, they are, there's something about it where it's got this tactile tangibility to it, and you just see the love and care behind the craft of filmmaking when you see it well done, especially in the classic Toho films. So great, just amazing. And pretty much all of these films, and with Toho being a massive, massive studio, definitely the most important Japanese studio. And you're talking decades after decades that the studio has been around from I believe they started in the late 40s, but you have the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and now. I mean, it's pretty staggering to see how many films they have. I don't own. I have quite a few Toho movies on DVD. I need to get more. I only have a few Godzilla films. Godzilla is my favorite, like sci-fi based monster of all time. I need to eventually get more all of those films on Blu-ray, and to also definitely do a review on those films. I mean, because they're such an integral part of my they were and they are such an integral part of my growing experience. But these movies were just fabulous. I was raised on them. They were always on cable. I remember as a kid going to work with my mom, and she had this little TV in her office, and I'd sit there and watch all the classic Toho movies, all the Godzilla movies, Mothra, and this was one of the films that I remember seeing, Battle in Outer Space. So talk about nostalgic. But I watched this collection not that long ago, and they're still just magical, and they're so fun. And Battle in Outer Space, like, I'm a huge sci-fi fan. I love it almost as much as horror. I had mentioned before in a previous video that as much as I love science fiction, I feel like, and I know I have a lot of sci-fi on this channel as far as video content, but I never feel like I have enough. I mean, the majority is definitely horror based videos, but I never feel like I do enough sci-fi. But this is definitely for me one of the most important movies, and I think one of the greatest as far as the Japanese style of filmmaking. Battle in Outer Space. So I can't recommend these movies enough if you haven't seen them, and especially Battle in Outer Space. So entertaining, just in every way possible. So moving forward, I'll do more shows where I'm gonna do specific shows around these movies. I don't usually buy box sets of things because occasionally I do. There's a few that I have bought that are really really great. My favorite box set that I bought was the Friday 13th collection. That's a pretty awesome box set. It comes with all kinds of great special features. And then I also have the Alien quadrilogy on DVD. That's got the best special features component I own. There's hours. I mean, there's like probably like 9 hours worth. It's insane. There's times where I'll just watch that because it's so good. I'll have that on DVD, but the movies that I love, which are really the first two, Alien and Aliens, I have those on Blu-ray. The rest of the movies not so much, but generally, box sets are not that great because I think they're great because of the price and you can own all the movies. But generally, what I see for box sets is it's generally like this, where they're the focus is on a lot of terrific, amazing films, but there's not really any special features and that kind of thing. Herschel Gordon Lewis is another example where I've seen lots of editions of his films in these big giant collections. He's like my favorite exploitation director, and I was reluctant to buy it that way, and then I came across all of his movies where they're I think it was Arrow, the company Arrow released all of the movies individually. So and I that's how I own most of his movies at this point, and that's how I bought them all, and they're just amazing editions, beautiful transfers, tons of special features. Plus, they actually come with an additional movie. So moving forward for Toho movies, that's what I'm gonna do. But this is pretty good though. This is definitely worth it. But when I come across these movies in the future, that is going to be something I will do and seek out. So thanks again. If you like this channel, please subscribe. And it's been some folks commenting a lot on these videos, and I love having the back and forth dialogue, and super fun. Get to talk about these awesome movies with other folks. So thanks again. This is Jason Dean, and we will see you next time. Peace.